Consigned Inventory Management. Our objectives for this section are as follows. After completing the lesson, you should be able to explain how to receive consigned inventory, describe consigned inventory tracking and visibility, explain consigned inventory consumption transactions, review a consumption advice, describe the consigned inventory return to supplier process, describe inventory counting and reconciliation, set up consigned inventory consumption rules, and describe consigned inventory related reports. This section will describe the consigned inventory process flow. As already referenced in previous lessons for our consigned inventory topics, this diagram depicts the consigned inventory process flow. The diagram is listed again in this lesson as a reference for the topics we'll be covering here. Our first main section will describe how the consignment line indicator shows that the receipt is for a consigned inventory. This screen shows that the Receive Expected Shipments user interface, which includes a consignment line indicator. This is a visual indicator to the receiving agent that the receipt is for consigned inventory. From the receiving agent's perspective, receiving consigned inventory is identical to receiving non-consigned inventory. Both consigned lines and non-consigned lines can be received on a single receipt. Additionally, the advanced search criteria allows users to search for consignment lines. The navigation to the screen would be through Warehouse Operations, Receipts, Receive Expected Shipments, then Receive Lines. This section describes how the consigned inventory details are viewed in the Manage Item Quantities user interface. This screen shows how to view consigned inventory details. The Manage Item Quantities user interface includes consigned inventory related details. Search criteria enables users to search for the consigned inventory by owning party site. Consigned Details tab is also available in the Details region. The consigned inventory on hand quantity associated with the owning party is also shown in the Details region. And the receipt number, material location, and lot and serial number details are shown for consigned inventory. The Manage Item Quantities user interface is navigable from the inventory work area. The Show Consigned Inventory Only field in the search criteria also allows users to search for consigned inventory only. This section describes consigned transactions, types of transactions, and inter-organization transfers of consigned inventory. Ownership changes from the supplier to the buyer when the consigned inventory is used by the buying organizations. This process is referred to as consumption. Consumption transactions are reported to the supplier periodically on the consumption advice. Consumption transactions are performed either explicitly or implicitly. Explicit consumption is performed when the user creates a transfer to own transaction. There is a separate user interface, the Create Separate to Own Transaction page, that allows users to perform explicit consumption. Implicit consumption occurs as a result of an inventory transaction, such as a sales order issue. The majority of transactions will occur through implicit consumption. Users can configure the transaction types that will result in consumption. For example, the user can configure a transaction type of sub-inventory transfer to trigger consumption. When implicit consumption occurs, there are two separate inventory transactions that are generated: transaction to represent the consumption of change in ownership, and transaction to represent the movement of inventory. Modeling implicit consumption as two separate transactions allows the segregation of transactions involving the change in ownership and the movement of material. Inventory consumption rules are defined to automatically consume material based on certain criteria, such as transaction type, item, supplier, and material location. The slide depicts three examples of transaction types that can result in consumption. Inter-organization transfer. This is when material transferred is between two inventory organizations. Sub-inventory transfer. Here, material is transferred between two sub-inventories. And miscellaneous issue. Material issues out of the inventory organization. This diagram shows inter-organization transfers of consigned inventory. Consigned inventory can be transferred across inventory organizations without forcing a change in ownership. Organizations have a need to transfer consigned inventory between locations while having the inventory remain consigned. A transfer between inventory organizations is known as an inter-organization transfer. Consumption rules. When a transfer is executed between organizations, consumption rules determine whether or not the transfer results in a change of ownership. The Manage Consumption Rule page enables you to configure which transaction types trigger consumption. In addition to the transaction type, the setup also supports the following associated attributes such as inventory organization, supply chain nodes, owning party of the consigned inventory, from inventory organization, to inventory organization, the from sub-inventory locator, the to sub-inventory locator, and so on. As a note, the transfer of consigned inventory from one inventory organization to another does not impact the aging period calculations. The aging period calculation is not reset based on the transfer of the consigned inventory. The original aging period is calculated based on the receipt or shipment date. This section describes consumption advice and how users can search for consumption advices. The consumption advice is a document used to communicate usage of consigned inventory to the supplier. The consumption advice does the following. It includes information such as the item, item quantity, and item price. It's created through a scheduled process and supports multiple communication methods including email, supplier portal, and print. It provides full traceability to the various source documents. For example, visibility is provided to the receipt, purchase order, and purchase agreement associated with the consumed inventory. It also provides visibility to consumption transactions that triggered ownership change. As shown in this slide, the transaction type of sub-inventory transfer triggers the consumption of consigned inventory. If the item is lot and/or serial controlled, lot and serial number details are shown as well. This screen shows the Review Consumption Advice user interface. The Review Consumption Advice user interface is available from the Inventory and Supplier Portal work areas. Users can search for consumption advices by attributes such as purchase agreement, consumption advice number, and supplier. The View Consumption Transaction button enables users to view the inventory transactions that triggered consumption. Additionally, users can view the consumed quantity along with purchase order and receipt details. There are two user interfaces that allow creation of consigned inventory transactions. The Create Transfer to Own Transaction user interface allows transfer of consigned inventory to owned inventory. This page can be used to transfer the ownership of consigned inventory where it is nearing the aging limit or the aging period has expired. The Create Transfer to Consigned Transaction page. There can be instances within the organization where consigned inventory is consumed by mistake. The Create Transfer to Consigned Transaction page allows the transfer of owned materials back to a consigned state. The Create Transfer to Consigned Transaction UI automatically identifies the original ownership change transaction, thereby eliminating the need for manual identification of the original transaction. These two user interfaces allow you to easily select lot and serial numbers associated with the transactions. Both pages are navigable from the inventory work area. Both transfer to owned and transfer to consigned transaction types will appear on the consumption advice. This topic describes how the inventory counting process allows organizations to perform cycle and physical inventory counting on consigned inventory. This diagram depicts how the inventory counting process allows organizations to perform cycle and physical inventory counting on consigned inventory. Both cycle count and physical inventory count user interfaces and reports include the owning party. When recording count sequences and physical inventory tags, users can enter the owning party associated with the count. Capturing the owning party on cycle and physical inventory counts enable organizations to properly segregate consigned inventory counts from owned inventory counts. This ultimately leads to increased cost savings and more accurate inventory counting practices within the organization. This section will describe how the consigned inventory returns process enables the return of materials to the supplier at any point in the consignment process. This screen shows how the consigned inventory returns process enables returns of materials to the supplier at any point in the process. Consigned inventory can be returned prior to consumption and after consumption. Additionally, material can be returned after the consumption device has been created. The returns line page displays a consignment line indicator. This indicator allows users to search for and process consigned inventory related return lines. The user interface provides the ability to return both consigned and non-consigned lines in a single transaction. The return lines page is navigable from the receipts work area. This section describes how Oracle Fusion Cost Management recognizes consigned and non-consigned purchase order receipts. This screen shows how Oracle Fusion Cost Management has the ability to recognize consigned and non-consigned purchase order receipts. Additionally, Cost Management can account for the transition of goods from consigned to non-consigned and vice versa. The accounting line types used for consigned receipts are different than regular non-consigned receipts. In most regions, consigned or non-owned inventory is valued at 0. Users can decide whether or not they want to post accounting entries for consigned transactions into the general ledger. If accounting entries for consigned transactions are posted into the general ledger, there is a special accounting line type that directs the entries to the appropriate clearing accounts. When Oracle Fusion Inventory Management transitions an item from consigned to non-consigned, Cost Management creates the required cost accounting distributions. These details can be seen on the Review Cost Accounting Distribution user interface. Sometimes, item transitions from consigned to non-consigned, and an event may trigger a reverse flow where non-consigned items need to be reverted to consigned. Oracle Fusion Cost Management supports the accounting for these reverse flows. In most regions, the inventory value of consigned items should be 0. The inventory value reports and analytics will list the quantity of consigned items along with the contingent value for purposes such as insurance and management information about the potential value of consigned items. This section will describe how consumption rules are used to determine ownership change of consigned inventory and describe the additional setup task of managing cost profiles. This screen depicts the Manage Consumption Rules user interface. Consumption rules are used to determine ownership change of consigned inventory. The Manage Consumption Rules task is accessed through the Manufacturing and Supply Chain Materials Management offering. Consumption rules are based on inventory transaction types along with other attributes such as the from organization, to organization, from subinventory, to subinventory, from locator, to locator, item, and owning party. Here's a use case example. Organization ABC has 2 subinventories, subinventory 1 and subinventory 2. They would like to establish a consumption rule that when material is transferred from subinventory 1 to subinventory 2, ownership changes occur. That is, after consigned inventory is transferred from subinventory 1 and subinventory 2, an ownership transaction occurs and ownership is transferred from the supplier to organization ABC. The consumption rules can be defined at a more granular level to include inventory locator, item, and owning party. The consumption transactions that are created will ultimately be communicated to the supplier through the consumption advice. This table describes the additional consigned inventory setup task, Manage Cost Profiles. It's used to define the consigned cost profile that your organization will assign to consignment items. This section describes consigned inventory reports. The Consumption Advice Report is used to communicate actual consumption of consigned inventory to your suppliers. The Physical Inventory Missing Tag Report lists any physical inventory that are missing tags, which includes consigned inventory owning party. The Physical Inventory Tag Listing Report is a listing report that shows physical inventory tags, which includes consigned inventory and owning party information. The Physical Inventory Tags Report is an additional report that shows physical inventory tags, which includes consigned inventory owning party. The Cycle Count Listing Report gives all counts including consigned inventory. And the Asset Inventory Evaluation Report, which is used for consigned inventory and all the values that can be used for audit and management purposes. In this lesson, we should have learned the following: explained how to receive consigned inventory, track and view consigned inventory, explain the consigned inventory consumption transactions, review a consumption advice, describe the consigned inventory return to supplier process, describe inventory counting and reconciliation, set up consigned inventory consumption rules, and describe the consigned inventory related reports.